This week's lecture will discuss how to start designing your self-management plan using the principles of behavior we have discussed throughout the course. For a self-management plan to be effective, we need to address how behaviors are learned. This means we will need to consider strategies that will address antecedents, behavior, and consequences. In terms of antecedents, we need to ask ourselves the following questions. Do we need to alter antecedent stimuli to change the likelihood of behavior occurring? Do we need to develop new antecedents? For example, someone who is trying to target exercising more may need to add visual prompts to remind them to engage in the behavior, or use a calendar app on their phone to alert them to times to work out. In terms of behavior, we need to know if we must teach a new alternative behavior or if we're going to target a competing behavior, or both. These behaviors must be well defined, just as the target behavior is. For a person cutting down on smoking, we need to know if gum chewing and writing in a journal will be part of the intervention, and if so, what do we need to do to make sure those behaviors occur? In terms of consequences, we need to decide what we are going to use. Extinction? Punishment? What type of reinforcement? What schedule? Will we combine reinforcement with punishment or extinction? In order to address each of these components of the plan, we must identify what possible techniques we will use. Some of the important considerations will be, is this target behavior respondent, operant, or both? Is it a behavioral excess? It happens too much? Or a deficit? It doesn't happen enough? It is important to realize that certain techniques will be better suited based on your answers to these questions. Behavioral excesses, like smoking and overeating, may require extinction or punishment along with reinforcement procedures for competing or alternative behaviors. They may also call for alterations in existing antecedents and/or the development of new antecedents for the replacement behaviors. Conversely, behavioral deficits require well-planned reinforcement methods for the target behavior and possibly for alternative or competing behaviors. Behavioral deficits may also require more prompting and the development of new antecedents. When you start designing the program, it is important to start first by identifying strategies and then developing tactics. An example would be identifying that you need to utilize the strategy of reinforcement, and your tactic to implement reinforcement will be to use a token system. Motivation is the key to understanding behavior and to changing behavior. Motivation changes from moment to moment and depends on the context. Motivation will affect how a reinforcer works or even if it will act as a reinforcer at all. We had mentioned in passing some effects of motivation in earlier modules. Being hungry, being tired, being in a rush to get somewhere. These are all conditions that affect what will be a reinforcer in that moment, as well as what type of behavior you are likely to engage in order to obtain that reinforcer. One type of motivation condition is the establishing operation. The establishing operation increases a consequence's effect and effectiveness and increases the frequency of behaviors that have worked to obtain that consequence before. Let's break that down into a more relatable definition. If you haven't eaten in many hours, the establishing operation is that you're hungry, a pizza will be really valuable, and you will be more likely to go get your phone, look up the pizza shop's number, call and order a pizza, and pay the delivery man. Those are the related behaviors. Another type of motivation condition is the abolishing operation. The abolishing operation decreases a consequence's effectiveness and decreases the frequency of the behaviors that have worked to obtain that consequence before. Taking the pizza example, if you've just eaten a pizza and you are full, what are the odds you're going to pick up your phone again and go through all those pizza-seeking behaviors? Probably next to zero. So, how do we use this understanding of motivation to create a better self-management plan? A few things to consider are setting realistic expectations. Don't expect that you will meet every single target immediately. Expect that there will be times that you fall short or fall back. or have a lapse. One way to address this is by setting up rule releases. An example of a rule release is, I can have whatever I want to eat on Saturday nights. Make a commitment to change. Sometimes writing down a commitment statement can provide a person with a little more motivation to stick to the plan as it is in writing. It is a promise to oneself. A more intensive approach is to make a public commitment. A public commitment can push you in more difficult times since others are aware of your targets. This can be a function of social pressure, avoiding the aversive condition of admitting failure, or of social support, receiving praise, support, recognition. You can also create a pros and cons list that outlines exactly what you stand to benefit from this plan. Additionally, the more time and effort you put into a plan, the less likely you are to abandon it. Finally, the more social support you can obtain, the better. Perhaps the best way is to involve others who are seeking to change similar behaviors. When you've identified all of your strategy and tactics, it will be time to put them all together in a behavioral contract. A behavioral contract is a formal, written, and signed agreement. The contract will state the target behavior in a clear, objective, and measurable ways. It will describe in detail the conditions in which it should or should not happen, the antecedent conditions. It will also outline the outcomes for performing or abstaining from the behaviors, the consequences for the behaviors. The contract should contain all of the following. 1. Target behaviors and antecedents. 2. The monitoring process. How are you taking data? 3. Consequences. Are you using punishment, reinforcement, both? 4. Bonus rewards, if any. 5. Schedule for reviewing progress. How often will you review the data or graphs? And 6. Your signature.